Hello everyone, I am Haz, and today I'm going to be talking about learning Japanese from home. How you can apply a self-study method to get yourself going with your language learning. I'm going to be sharing my experiences, mistakes I've made, and the resources I've used that you can use yourself to give yourself the best chance at learning Japanese at home. If you want more sort of videos like this, I'm posting Japanese learning videos every week talking about my experiences learning the language. If you're into that sort of stuff, I'd love it if you subscribed, and hey, leave a nice comment, I'd enjoy that. So, learning a second language isn't the easiest task. It's also a pretty time-consuming one. You've got to learn new grammar points, vocabulary, writing systems, and in the case of Japanese, you've got kanji, which is a whole other thing to deal with. So, it can be difficult understandably, to find the time to find a dedicated class. And that's not to mention, maybe you just can't afford to pay for that regular commitment, or you just don't have the time in your busy lifestyle. That was certainly my case when I began learning the language. I was a university student studying something completely different. I didn't have the funds nor the time of the day to go to a dedicated place to learn Japanese. But I really, really wanted to do it, so I had to get creative. I started off by basically realizing that I had to learn the writing system for Japanese. So I started with hiragana and katakana. I basically spent the best part of a week going online, finding a chart, I think it was, that went through all the hiragana. I used a few mnemonics and that to just get an idea and make up little stories for each hiragana. For example, ka, hiragana ka, I visualized as a car going off a cliff. That sort of thing. These are a few stories that I just found online, little things people use to remember them. If you've already learnt hiragana and katakana already, you're in a really great place to keep going with your Japanese. The second thing I did was I went and found I think it was a video on YouTube that had the 25 most common Japanese words. And I thought to myself, alright, let's just write all 25 of these down, put them on flashcards that have the Japanese reading on one side, English reading on the other, and I would just test myself until I got them. And yeah, some of these phrases I've never used again. There's sort of those textbook phrases you hear about that, yeah, they mean that, but nobody says that actual thing. I just used them, and this was a good introduction to some words that do come up a lot, like, konnichiwa or sumimasen, that you would use, quite regularly and would need to know. It was then at this stage where I was able to get my hands on the very first Genki book. And I spent quite a while going through that book, going chapter by chapter, and working through each of the different grammar points until I got to the end of the book. One thing I do find a little bit strange about the Genki books is they do pack a lot of content into a small space. It is certainly manageable, but I felt like even at the pace I was going, I was sort of rushing through things. There was one point where I came across saying days of the month, so the 6th of January and the 5th of February, and that sort of thing. And I thought to myself, oh, I should have learnt this earlier on. And as it turned out, I think it was like Genki chapter 5 that I had read, but I hadn't really properly paid attention to. And yeah, that's probably partially on me. But the something to keep in mind with the Genki books is that they do pack a lot in, and they also assume that you know hiragana and katakana to begin with. That said, I think they're a pretty good resource to use. They are nice and simply laid out, and if you do have the time to go through them, they're worth checking out. So I've left a link below if you want to go and grab those. These books did, however, give me a pretty basic understanding of Japanese. I could make a sentence, quite simple, but I could say it and I could use it. But at this point, it was all theoretical. A year after this, I had the opportunity to go to Japan, and it was the first night in Osaka where I was just lost. Walking around, and I didn't know where my Airbnb was, and I didn't have internet access at the time. I was sort of nervous about approaching someone with Japanese, which is understandable. It's a language that you've only sort of, at this stage, seen in theory. You might have seen videos of people speaking, but it doesn't quite feel real yet. The moment it became real to me was when I was able to use my basic Japanese knowledge learned from Genki to ask someone for directions to my Airbnb, which I knew was near the library. So I asked directions to the library. They couldn't help me, so they flagged someone else who was riding a bike down, and they tried to help me. And they found a third. This woman came over with the phone who was trying to help her. None of them could because it wasn't in the library at all. I eventually had to use my Japanese again at another hotel to get directions somewhere else, and I went to a Lawson convenience store. They had a map there. Basically, this whole night I was using Japanese over and over again, and I was able to push through that level of shyness. One problem with that though is why I was so impressed with myself that I was able to say words in Japanese, I wasn't really able to understand what was being said. I felt like I should, so I nodded my head like I did, but the reality was, while my speaking skills were okay, my listening skills just weren't there. I hadn't really experienced any real natural speed Japanese language spoken, so my brain wasn't able to pick up on the rhythm or patterns or words inside the sentence. I heard the occasional word like left or right all together, and with like natural nuance to language, it just wasn't sticking with me. So when I got back from Japan, one of the things I started doing was looking into Japanese language podcasts, particularly with people talking at a natural pace, so that I was able to tune into it. And the thing with that is you don't quite pick it up at the start. It's going so fast and you're so not used to it that you don't understand really anything at all. The odd word will come up here and there, but for the most part you're just sitting there letting it almost wash over you. One thing I did was I had a playlist I found on YouTube of just videos of people talking. And this is a good resource I've recommended in the past, is to go on YouTube and find Japanese videos about literally anything. Anything you're interested in or want to learn about, I'm sure there's someone in Japanese who is talking about it. Whenever I found something, I would add it, and I would just shuffle this playlist when I was, just at home doing absolutely nothing, just in the background, so I had this Japanese just coming into my ears, and I did find I got better. I did find more and more I was able to have a bit of a back and forth conversation when I was able to go to Japan a few years after that. I was able to sort of have more proper conversations. Again, they weren't the most complex conversation. It was more or less a sort of, where are you from? I'm from here. Oh, I've been there before. Oh, that's great. That sort of thing. It wasn't but that was a massive step, especially because 2 years prior, I couldn't have introduced myself. One thing I did find that was I was able to understand more and more Japanese things without relying on subtitles or anything like that. They had Japanese news on TV, and I wasn't able to tell you exactly what was happening, but I could tell you the structure of what was being said. Something was happening, and because of this unfortunate thing had happened. I couldn't tell you what this and this were, but then I looked at the images on the screen, and there were potatoes, and then it showed potato chips, and then it showed a graph, and I was able to work out that what was happening was, and this is just my guess, I haven't actually looked into this since then, what I saw on TV was that there was a potato shortage in Japan, or wherever Japan got their potatoes from, which was leading to an increase in potato chip prices, or a shortage in potato chips. I think that's what it was. But more and more you'll start to maybe not know the specific vocabulary, but you'll learn sentence patterns and you'll get used to that sort of thing. Eventually I decided to use a service called italki. If you haven't heard of it already, I'm probably not the first person telling you about it, but if you haven't, it's basically a service where you can basically pay a bit of money to get somebody to speak to you in Japanese online. Just a language tutor service. I only did about 3 lessons, honestly, and it was helpful. I just couldn't afford to keep going with it. If that's something that works for you too, I would definitely recommend that as well. Another resource I found really helpful was Wanikani, because I was starting to get into kanji, and I'd used Heisig's Remembering the Kanji book. And I was going through that, and yeah, it got me going from the start, but I just found it wasn't my learning style. It basically, what that book does is it tells you a little story about the small radical components that comprise kanji. So one kanji might be made of 2 or 3 different smaller elements. It tells you stories about them, and then when you've got 3 of them in one kanji, it'll make a story about those elements. And eventually it sort of gets to the point where you're making up your own, because it just goes, oh, you should know by now, so off you go. Which didn't quite work for me, and I just felt like I was doing the same repetitive thing. What I found with Wanikani is it has 3 levels for free, and then then you can pay for it. It would let you go through levels, so you felt like you were progressing. You're able to go, oh great, I'm level 1 now, level 2 now, level 3 now. And it would teach you the radicals, it would teach you some kanji, and it would teach you some vocab. I don't think this is the only thing you should be doing. I think it's a really great thing to supplement an ongoing Japanese learning program where you are teaching grammar, you are learning vocab, and that's something you should always be building. But I just found Wanikani was a great resource just to have there, because it used a sort of sort of like a flashcard system, like a spaced repetition thing, where the more you got something right, the less frequently it would show you, and the more you got something incorrect, it would show you more often. So the idea being, you would get those ones you struggled with drilled into you a bit better. After I've been to Japan, the first time after using the Genki books, I moved on to the Japanese from Zero books. I found the video series online that accompanies the books and watched a few, and worked out that I was probably at the book 3 level at that stage. So there, I found them to be a lot better in terms of their pacing. They cover less in each book, I would say, than the Genki books, but I find the way that they go through grammar points a lot better. And they have the workbook sort of inside there. So you read the book, you do the activities. I just found it stuck better for me. You might find Genki or some other book works better for you. I would recommend maybe trying to find the videos for these online are a good indicator of the stuff that's in the book and how they're paced. There might be a Genki trial somewhere where it shows the first few pages of the book. If you can go into a physical bookstore, it might be good to have a flick through and see what works for you. But I definitely recommend that a textbook is a great sort of fun foundational element for your Japanese, and everything else can build on top of that. Short answer is, though, you can learn Japanese by yourself at home. There's a few other resources you can use to supplement that, but you can build those foundations at home, and it's all about getting to the point where you can use Japanese resources, Japanese native resources, TV shows, movies, books, magazines, games, whatever you can find to just keep practicing Japanese. Particularly if you get to come to Japan, you are able to see it all over the place, really. And so you don't have an excuse not to learn it, because everywhere you go, you'll be dependent on it. And that was the thing I found in Japan, was that when I'm in Japan, I become more dependent on the language and I have to use it. Whereas when I'm not in Japan, I'm able to go days without speaking, reading, or hearing. Which, you know, if you're studying a language and you really want to commit to it, you need to be doing it as much as possible. I would say every day. Definitely every day in some capacity. But that's it for today, guys. That is my experience learning Japanese from home. Hopefully you got something of value out of this today. More videos in the coming weeks. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.